Hello, it's Scott Manley here with part 3 of my tutorial on a Kerbal space program. Now we are going to go into space and we're going to stay there. So we're going to start building an appropriate spacecraft for this task. Now, in the previous mission you went straight up and eventually, after your engines burned out, you slowed down and fell back to Earth, or fell back to Kerbal. Now, if you want to stay in space, what you need to do is go up and then go sideways at sufficient speed that you are being pulled down back towards the planet at the same speed as the planet is curving away from you. That sounds very fancy, but actually it's pretty easy. So I'm building myself a very simple rocket here. We're going to put the appropriate scientific instrumentation on the side so we can actually get the science while we're in orbit. Obviously we have to balance this here, but yeah, other than that, we're just going to take this capsule back because we're going to grab the science from here and put it in there. So we've got a slightly simpler rocket this time. So that is our upper stage that will take us into orbit and let us maneuver up there. And below this, we are going to have a 3-tank rocket, let's say, right? Because we need to make this able to lift our vehicle. Now you notice there's 3 engine types here, and in this stage I used this small engine because it has low thrust but high efficiency. For my main stage I'm going to use this engine, which this engine has higher thrust. The LVT30 has higher thrust, but the T45 enables engine based steering. That way it can move the engine nozzle left to right to give you some steering. Now I'm going to build 4 rocket fins on the side using 4-way symmetry, and to actually help us get through the first part of the launch we're going to strap some of these solid rocket boosters on the side. Now you could just put them on like that. The problem is that those would then have to be carried into orbit. What we want to do is dump them, and to do that we use the TT38 radial decoupler, which is under the structural tab. Again, you attach these to the side. We're going to put 4 on just now. And the hard part is, yes, there. Sometimes it doesn't want to go. That's just natural, and you'll find that you have to finagle things to make them fit. But there we have a rocket which will launch using the solid rocket boosters, and then we can also use this for steering. So we want to fire this in the first stage. Now the other thing is, the way that sits, all the force is going to go through that engine. So we're going to support the rocket a little better if we put these decouplers and these little structural members here. That way the force is spread out a little more and you're unlikely to break this rocket off. One final thing, one final tweak, is we can right click on the solid fuel boosters, and I'm going to limit the thrust to about 60, 1/3, 2/3 of its usual, right? That way we're going to get longer burn time from these, and we're going to spend less time fighting against the aerodynamic drag. So we're ready to launch. Hit the green button. Off we go. Okay, so we're sitting on the launch pad. We are, well, more or less ready to go, but since I want you to see what's going on, I'm going to time accelerate while sitting on the launch pad. Now you see on the launch pad I can hit the dot, the full stop key, or the time accelerate key repeatedly to increase time acceleration rate by quite a high amount. I want to launch during daytime just so you can see things a little easier. You can actually accelerate it up to 100,000 times while sitting in the launch pad, but I don't need to do nearly so much. Now, the other thing to think about here is I said that you have to go sideways across the surface at orbital speed. You actually have to get up to about 2.3 kilometers per second at about 100 kilometers up. And there's a correct way to go where you need the least amount of fuel. So if you think about it, you remember how we saw the planet rotating and the stars appeared to move from left to right? That is because the planet is rotating in this direction. In fact, even while sitting still on the surface of Kerbal, you're actually moving at about 175 meters per second to the east. On the nav ball, that is the 90 degrees vector, so that is the correct way to go. That is the direction that will use the least amount of fuel. I'm just going to make a quick adjustment in my staging here to make sure that these decouplers fire at the same time as my engines. So enable the lock, bring my throttle up to maybe 30% because we're going to save most of our fuel for later, and hit space. And that's us, we're going straight up. Now, because of the atmosphere, we don't want to immediately turn to the right. because the atmosphere actually generates a lot of drag in Kerbal's space program. So we want to more or less go straight up until we reach about 10 kilometers, and then we're going to turn over. Now, the correct way to turn over is to do it gradually, but for beginners, I would say turn over to 45 degrees and then turn all the way flat when you reach the right velocity. So we're going to put that into action here, and we're just waiting for our engines to burn out. They are making a lot of noise. And as we're about to burn out, start throttling your engine up and then hit space. So now we're on this engine, we've reached 10 kilometers, so push the D key to bring the nose over towards 90 degrees. Now you'll see actually that the orbit, the nav ball has changed to orbit mode, and that already showed our prograde vector pointing sideways. That was because we had that extra 175 meters per second of velocity. So we weren't just going straight up, we were going sideways. Now I'm going to go to the map mode by pressing M, bring out my nav ball, and we're just going to watch our spacecraft here heading up towards an orbit-like trajectory, right? If you want, if you're feeling really bold, you can kind of watch the apoapse, and if it starts going above about 50 seconds, you can bring the nose of the rocket down so that it matches the prograde vector. Right, that if this starts decreasing, if your time to apoapse by mousing over starts decreasing, then you're too flat. But for a perfect launch, you really want to keep your time to apoapse at about a minute. Anything more and you end up, you're wasting fuel. So in fact, you can flatten your trajectory a little more. What we're going to do is wait for this to get up to about 100 kilometers, 100,000 meters. So 80, 87, 90, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 100, and press X to kill our velocity. So I'm going to come out of map mode just for a second. We're flying up. We have a little bit of fuel in this stage. We're going to use that to begin our orbital insertion. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to follow this arc ballistically, and then when we're up here above the atmosphere, we're going to fire our rocket sideways to put ourselves into a perfect circular orbit. Now, we can do that manually by pointing the vehicle along the nav ball, or I can use a maneuver node. So I'm going to show you how to use a maneuver node. We have 2 minutes to figure this out. So we click on the apoapse, add maneuver, and this gives us a bunch of vectors we can pull. We can pull these to say what would happen if we thrust, say, upwards or downwards, or backwards or forwards. You really only want to go forwards right now. So we're going to pick this up and drag it. And you'll see that instead of the blue orbit, we also have a yellow dotted orbit. And that is projecting where we'll be. I'm just going to drag this, and you'll see that if I turn it out over on the other side, we can see a periapse is now 82 kilometers. That's great. And as you see, as I get close to making them very similar, they'll actually swap places like that. So now what that's done is we figured out that we need to burn 738 meters per second, and we need to thrust along this vector. On the nav ball, they have put this little blue vector that we want to point our spacecraft at. Now, it says 21 seconds, but we're not going to get 21 seconds worth of fuel from this stage. We're going to burn whatever fuel we can from this stage, and then we're going to keep burning with the next stage up, which doesn't have nearly as much thrust, but it should have more than enough for our purposes. So I'm going to wait until about T minus 30 seconds. We could time accelerate in, but it's, if you're feeling really aggressive, you can time accelerate, but it's quite possible that you actually miss your insertion window. Okay, so there we are. What I'm going to do is switch out, and now start throttling up again using the shift key. You see we're accelerating at about 3G. Fuel is burning very quickly, and we took about 200 meters per second off our bar. Hit space again, and now we're thrusting on this engine, which isn't nearly as powerful, so our estimated burn is lower. But on the other hand, we've ditched this vehicle, so we're not carrying nearly as much mass. We're only burning this. Tells us we're going to have 17 seconds left, and you can see that we're burning 1.17 units of fuel per second, so we're going to have a decent amount of fuel left, and that's good because, well, we're going to need to go into another orbit after this. And there, kill it. That sounds pretty good. We should be very close to our target orbit. We're not doing this super precise. They are 104 by 99. We are in a circular orbit around the planet Kerbal, and we can time accelerate and watch the planet rotate underneath us. Now, if you're looking at mods, incidentally, there is a Kerbal beautification mod which adds clouds and looks fantastic. It doesn't do anything else to the gameplay, but if you've got the graphics card, I think it's worth using. So look, we've flown through the Terminator. It is now night time. You can't see very much because there's no sun here, obviously. We're about to come out the other side. Sunrise. Now, of course, we're up here to do science. And if I ask the crew report, well, we get no science because we already did all this science on our little suborbital jaunt. So what we want to do is now, using our engines, we want to go into a higher orbit. So I'm going to just create a maneuver node a couple of minutes in front of me. We're going to lift our apoapse, our point furthest from the planet Kerbal, up to about 300 kilometers. I do the same thing. I just create the maneuver node, grab this, and then there, 338. It's going to take 154 meters per second, 8 seconds worth of fuel, so we have plenty of fuel left here. And once again, you see it's created this little blue marker here. So now we're a little more confident. We can time accelerate into that. Just don't go too fast. If you miss it though, you're not going to fall back to Kerbal now. So you can take as much time as you like. There we go. Throttle up the engine. You don't need to do it at 100% this time. You know, you can take as much time as you like, as I've said. There below us is, well, I guess that's the desert. You can see the various regions of the planet Kerbal. There is a desert you can investigate. Press X once our bar reaches the bottom. And then we can click on the maneuver node and then click on the X to cancel it once we've passed through it. So up 300 kilometers above the surface, we should have more science. So of course, to get there, we're going to time accelerate up. And there we go. We can see that is the continent where we start. There is the Kerbal Space Center, just for reference. So when our altitude reaches 300 kilometers, we're going to stop and start doing some science. So this is a new region previously unvisited by the Kerbals. Let's see what the crew report says. It's very round. Great, let's keep this data. Now, we're going to actually do the science of the mystery goo, which says the goo feels right at home. The material bay says the high radiation environment caused a few samples to glow. It looks like it would be fun to paint the rocket with this. So finally, we want to get out, and I'm actually going to show you a little bit about navigating with the jetpack now. So I'm going to push W to kind of put the rocket in a vertical orientation. That helps make sure that you can get in and out easily. Sometimes it can be... Oh, I reset that. I meant to keep that data. Observe materials bay. Once again, keep that data. Okay, so now we are going to go on EVA. And this one time we have some real important stuff to do here. So we click on... Well, before we do this, actually, press F5 to save the game. Because if you end up floating off into space, it's nice to be able to reload. So EVA outside, and in this case he has floated away without grabbing the ladder. Press F to grab it and you're fine. EVA report, get the information. We've recorded our observations about the situation, so we'll keep that. But now we actually want to grab this data and put it in the capsule because we're going to detach it on our way back to the planet. So again, press space to let go. It helps if you press L to turn on the light, incidentally. There's his light. R turns on the RCS system. Now, you want to be very careful and move around and get close to these. I'm pressing S to go backwards, Control to go down, A to kill my velocity and move in, Shift, get in really close, and this is the hard part because you've got to kind of balance them. Collect the data, and it tells us once we've removed the data, we can no longer do science. It's not a problem. We can collect the data from this, and once again the goo canister is useless after we've used it. And then we want to very carefully head back and grab onto this. So I can store these experiments, but it also says I can take the data because we'll have the crew report in there. And it's nice to be able to perhaps do a crew report on the way back. We've stored all the data, it's in the capsule, press F to board, and now we have to go back to the planet Kerbal. Now, how do you get back? Well, many people think you just point the rocket at the ground and you will eventually hit the ground. And to a certain extent that is true, however, it is heinously inefficient. Instead, you want to find the direction backwards along your direction of motion, or retrograde. On the nav ball, there is this little three-way, this tri-directional circle thingy. This is called the retrograde marker. Retrograde meaning backwards. So if we fire our engines along that, we will slow down our orbital velocity and we will ultimately fall back into the atmosphere, and that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to come out to the map view again so you can see this happening. I've pointed in the right direction and I'm just going to throttle up just a little. You see very tiny amount of thrust. You can see just the tiniest sliver of thrust here. But our periaps is dropping. You know, even though this tiny amount of thrust is dropping down, I'm going to bring it down to about 35 kilometers. You can do this as quickly as you like. It doesn't matter if you overdo it. As long as you get your periaps down below 70, you will eventually return. 35 will get you down quicker, you know, because the atmosphere, once you enter the atmosphere, it will slow you down and you will land safely, assuming you have a parachute. And there we go, 35 kilometers. We are, well, 33. Now we're just going to time accelerate around the dark side of the planet again. We don't like the night because you can't see very much. And as soon as we come below 70 kilometers, we will drop out of time acceleration. And that's probably a good time for us to actually ditch that excess stage there. You can see the spacecraft. Well, there it is going to go away. That other part is going to fall without a parachute. But I'm taking the parachute with me. That will save me from crashing into the ground and, you know, being splattered all over it. So if you... Well, you can. You don't really need to worry about stability at this point, but you can work with the stability control on if you like. And you can time accelerate at up to 4 times regular speed. I kind of like the way you can see these mountains just on the horizon there. Once you get low enough, it does actually model the terrain so you can see where you're going. Obviously, on the real Earth, you would never see that level of variation on the horizon. The Kerbal landscape is way rougher because the planet is 10 times... Oh, there we go. Oops. When you're running at 4 times time acceleration, sometimes the stability control system gets a little janky. So, yeah, I'm just going to ditch the control system for now. And there, oh, look, we're flying over these mountains. Hopefully, we're going to get into a new biome and collect some more science on the way down there. There we've got some... you know, shock heating going on, re-entry effects. Again, these don't affect you in the base game. If you want them to affect you, you have to download a mod called Deadly Re-entry. At least that is true of version 0.23. In the real world, obviously, re-entry effects can be hugely dangerous. Now, I'm staying at 4 times time acceleration because I want to get to the ground as quickly as possible, but you should be careful you're not using 4 times time acceleration when you get too low because it'll tear the parachute off. And obviously you need to actually press the spacebar to deploy the parachute. There we go. So I deployed it below 500 meters. We're now descending at less than 7 meters per second. And yeah, you can see some other stuff here. There's all these trees in the landscape here. Those are not enabled by default. If you go to the main menu and under the graphics setting, there's something called terrain scatter, work in progress. That's how you get these trees or rocks or whatever. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you bump into them. They're not physical objects. Let's get some science here. Oh, darn, I forgot to do a crew report while falling through the sky. That's unfortunate. Okay, Jebediah, what do you say here? Oh, this is a most precarious situation, because we're flying, because we're on a ladder. Yes, that's a bug still. Let's store that data and get another EVA report. I don't think a spacesuit was entirely necessary to get here. Soon, Jebediah. This is dirt and grass and some small rock. You suspect this isn't going to be much of a ground-breaking discovery. And finally, we can plant ourselves a flag on the surface to commemorate the momentous occasion of our return to Kerbal in one piece after having flew around it for an hour. First Orbit is a truly is a good enough name. There we go, First Orbit. And that's us. The only question is, can we get back inside, or will the flag prevent us? They are back inside. We can recover the whole capsule. And of course, having recovered this vehicle from orbit with its science, we can go over to the R&D lab and spend our science if we want to. At this stage, I would advise going for electrics, but I don't actually have enough science for that. So we'll look at that in future episodes. Until then, I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.